The family of Tyree Nichols and their attorneys are now calling for lawmakers to consider Tyree's Law. It would demand accountability for officers who fail to intervene when they see crimes being committed by their fellow officers. They're also calling for the so-called Scorpion Unit to be disbanded. The ex-police officers charged with Nichols' murder were part of that unit, which was created to address violent crimes within the community. The Memphis mayor says that unit has been inactive since Nichols' death. A former member of Obama's 21st Century Policing Task Force and Black Lives Matter activist, Brittany Packnett Cunningham, joins me now. Brittany, it's always so good to see you, but of course, under these circumstances, there really aren't any words. I know other guests in the last hour and even this hour talking about Obama's policing task force and what it was supposed to do. It was created following the police shooting of Michael Brown all the way back in 2014. Did you ever think all these years later, you and I would be still dealing with this conversation about the same thing?
Sadly, yes, because police violence was not invented the day that Michael Brown Jr. was shot and killed by Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson. We had been experiencing this kind of brutality at the hands of people who are here to supposedly serve and protect us for decades. And so, unfortunately, it's going to take us longer than just a few years to get out of this situation, especially when so many people are reticent to recognize and acknowledge the truth. You know, Katie, I did a quick Google search yesterday as I was preparing for these conversations. I prayed and I spoke with Memphis organizers to make sure I was amplifying the right things. But I also wanted to Google video of Tyree's mother because I wanted to hear from her to really center myself to have the appropriate conversations and approach. And, you know, Google will predict the kind of searches that you might want to make based off of how popular searches have been going about the topic that you type in. So I typed in Tyree Nichols' name, and underneath that popped up Tyree Nichols' criminal record, Tyree Nichols' death video, Tyree Nichols' guilt. And so the implication that we are still in a place where the person who has suffered from police violence, the person who is now dead after a traffic stop, would be guilty for his own murder is a very, very sad but relevant reminder that we're going to be in this situation for a while because society still refuses to see what we're really dealing with.
Brittany, let's talk about human nature then. You could get Tyree's Law on the books. The fact that you'd even have to put something like that as a law is disgusting to me. This idea that you'd force somebody under the law to have to intervene when a fellow officer is doing something illegal. There's rules, policies, procedures in all of these departments. I'm having this conversation over and over again this morning because it doesn't make sense to me. You keep on trying to pass legislation, which obviously would be great, but you got to change the culture. And I asked some of these guests, how do you reform this? And it's really kind of amorphous, right? Because you got to make the individual officers care enough about human life to make sure that they do the right thing. What's the answer? Is there one?
Well, even more than that, Katie, besides just correcting individual animus, we have to recognize that this is a systemic issue, that when you look at the roots of policing in slave patrols during one of the most heinous chapters in American history, when you look at the fact that so often this is about controlling bodies, controlling Black bodies, controlling homeless bodies, controlling impoverished bodies, that's not just an individual issue. That's not even just a cultural issue. That requires us to look at the entire institution and really say, is this about serving and protecting, or is this about serving wealth and protecting property? Too often it is the latter. So we actually need to be innovative. That is supposed to be what our country is known for. We need to use our spirit of innovation to actually protect the most fundamental aspects of democracy, meaning that citizens of America should not be subject to violence at the hands of the state when they're simply trying to get home, as Tyree Nichols was that night. So really that innovation requires us to reimagine what public safety looks like. It means putting money in the things that are so often criminalized, like houselessness, mental health, and more. It means making sure that we give people the proper resources they need to be safe from the ground up instead of over-police from the top down. And it means that we need to actually look at the way that we're spending our money and move a lot of that that money from bloated police budgets and things like the Scorpion Unit to places like mental health responses when people need that, like the proper traffic support when people get into an accident, because that doesn't need to involve an armed officer. There are solutions here, but the solution, frankly, is to rebuild the entire thing from the ground up. That will take time, that will take patience, that will take money, and far too many people are not willing to commit those things.
Because it's an almighty dollar. You know, Brittany, look, getting rid of something like the Scorpion Unit, for example, by the way, they're not exclusive to Memphis, right? Every city, every major city has these saturation forces or saturation units where they go and they kind of swarm specific areas of a community, oftentimes black and brown communities, right? That's where they're located. That's just a bandage on a hemorrhaging wound here. I have had this conversation today. I think change came very quickly, and there was consequence for what happened in Memphis because there was a female chief of police, a woman of color who actually was at a rank of a big, huge bureaucracy like a police department that said, this is not going to happen on my watch. There's going to be accountability. Is that part of the reform? Is that part of the change, too?
I think that we've seen the kinds of reforms and experiments to further diversify police departments, to further diversify police leadership. Yeah. And unfortunately, these tragedies are still happening under their watch. I mean, we look at one of the officers who was involved in the killing of George Floyd. He was a black man who said that he entered the police force to try and change things from the inside. And now he is involved with one of the most heinous acts of police violence that we've seen this decade. And so, unfortunately, when you look at an institution that is inherently anti-Black, inherently anti-female, inherently anti-progress, it can be incredibly challenging to be a Black person or a person of color or a woman or a progressive and try to make progress in a place that is not built for it. So I, again, think that we need to look at truly reimagining this from the ground up and recognizing that these kind of Band-Aid solutions that sound good, unfortunately, we've given them time to work. And last year, the police killed more people than they ever have before since we've been keeping records. So unfortunately, those reforms are not proving to work, and we need to go back to the drawing board.
It's an uphill battle, but with people like you, Brittany, Packnett, Cunningham, I have some hope. Thank you for being here this morning, and thanks for your analysis. I really appreciate it.